Welcome to the ESI Africa Virtual Studio, broadcasting from the East African Power Convention in Nairobi, Kenya. Today I am with Laura Kiwelu, who is the Senior Associate at Norton Fulbright in Tanzania. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Laura, you just sat on a panel discussion that looked specifically at the solutions for stakeholder involvement. And that was the end of a very, very interesting day looking at the bankability of projects. So ending off the whole day with looking at the stakeholder engagement, which I think is a very important part of the whole project that are taking place in East Africa. So just to start off, why did you decide to take part on this panel?
Well, I was actually moderating on the panel, so it was a good opportunity to moderate on something. And with the event actually taking place in Nairobi, which is where I'm used to working, it's familiar ground, so I thought it would be a good first opportunity to have a go at moderating and trying out that role. And then the topics that were being discussed were very useful topics, and the panel that was being put together was a good selection of advisors, both local in Kenya and also an international advisor from London as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I heard coming out a lot around on the panel, not only your panel but the other panels as well, was around tariffs. That came out quite a bit, the whole concern around the tariff and whether this can be used as a negotiating point. Is that something that you feel is very important to stakeholder engagement as well?
So the level of tariffs at the moment for solar, it's well known that they're dropping, and because there's been very well publicised examples of low tariffs, such as the scaling solar low tariff, the low tariffs that have been achieved in South Africa, and the low tariffs that have been achieved further afield in the Middle East, in particular in Dubai. There's an expectation from African and the government and public sector that their tariffs will also come down as well. But my concern is, and the concern in the industry is that is an expectation without actually considering the wider reasons for the fact that the tariffs can be low, and one of those reasons is the fact that on some of these projects, the reason the tariff is low is partly due to the fact that there is a secured site. There are not some of the land issues and the very, very early on grassroots project costs that developers have to afford in the greenfield projects where they themselves are procuring the site.
Right, land issues is something that can be a sticking point in any project. So what would you advise developers in terms of land issues and community engagement?
Yeah, I think as we discussed on the panel, never underestimate your local community and the importance of community engagement from a very early stage. And views on the panel were mixed as to whether that takes the form of actual material, substantive giving back to the community, such as a minority equity stake in the project, or actually giving the community a form of substantive other benefit. Or whether it really just came down to engaging with the community and getting the community to want the project to happen in their area, and showing them the benefits of having the project happening for them in the form of, for example, rental revenues, or better quality power for distributed projects. So there were varying views about how to deal with it, but the unanimous conclusion was that the local community cannot be underestimated, and the importance of thinking about the local community first and very early on in a project, not leaving it to the point of time when the lenders come in and they're looking at your environmental and social impact assessment and questioning it. How was your community engagement? It has to be thought of up front.
So that one of the questions that I found really profound was how important is local content? And I think that from the panel it came out that it is extremely important and that there are different ways of looking at it. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so in my experience, local content, although it's not really regulated in the region, meaning that there is no regulations or law around local content for the power sector, it will always come up at some point during the project. And so I think developers really have to acknowledge that as well, and have a local content proposal for their project actively, rather than being caught on the back foot, because at some point the government will mention it. Possibly not in the PPA negotiation, possibly in the government support agreement negotiation, but it will come up. And developers need to consider that it will come up, and that they should be putting forward a proposal and considering what local content obligations they would be able to comply with for their project. And again, scoping out what amount of local skill is available and what type of jobs on the project can be done by local workers.
Right. I want to take it back a bit to where the panel discussion started. And you were just looking at preparing bid documents, and you mentioned that when it comes to request for proposals, there's a lot of work that goes into that. Can you mention any of the particularly challenging or interesting documents that you've had to deal with?
So we have as private sector lawyers, we respond to a lot of requests for proposals that come through. And sometimes these are requests for proposals that we have to do just ourselves, and other times that we have to link up with another advisory firm. So, for example, policy advisory or financial advisory, environmental, technical, for example. And so a lot of work will go into meeting exactly the requirements on the RFP. And the concern is sometimes that what if the requirements are not actually clear, what's required, and that leads to a lot of work which could be avoided really, because you're trying to respond to something that is not clear. So definitely our message to entities who are issuing RFPs, whether they're private sector or public sector, is just to be very clear about what's required, and also really consider the timing as well. And I raised examples of bids that we've put a lot of work into that we've never heard from again. So not even an acknowledgement of receipt, for example. So we don't actually know, particularly for government or public sector bids, if it was actually received. And then other times where we find out after about 3 months that we've been shortlisted, but then we're asked to provide a even more in-depth proposal within a week, which is just not possible. So we've then had to drop out of the process, and we've later heard out that advisory function wasn't actually ever awarded. So, what was the point of all that time and money, both on the public sector side, not just our side, going into issuing an RFP if it wasn't then followed through properly. So I think as much advanced planning as possible in the issuing of RFPs, and a consideration of time and a consideration of what's actually required. What do you want people to respond on?
Right, communication, clear communication right from the start is so important to both parties.
Yeah,
or all
exactly.
parties involved, right. So lastly, Laura, during the panel discussion, you mentioned that you've been involved in several projects across the continent. You mentioned Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Kenya. For you, what has been the most interesting project that you've dealt with, and why?
I enjoy all of them. I think certainly the one that stands out the most is the gigawatt project that I worked on in Rwanda, which was just 8.5 megawatts. I say just, but it amounts to about 8 or 9% of the installed capacity in Rwanda. And to me, that really stood out as what can happen when a developer is really dedicated to a project. Because the developer in question had very little experience in developing power projects, but the fact that he was so dedicated and so committed and lived and breathed the project just meant that it happened in a year, from project inception, appointing lawyers, right through to financial close, and then it was operational 6 months later. So that really stands out as a landmark project that had great impact, despite the fact that it was just 8.5 megawatts, because it got operational, and it's been talked about and highlighted because not many projects have actually closed in the region. So that stands out, and then also some of my work I was doing in Zimbabwe on the Kariba hydro project expansion was also very enjoyable as well, because again that was quite a novel project, and I enjoyed engaging with the power station manager, for example, talking about the technical aspects of operating a dispatchable hydro plant. And then the countries I've enjoyed visiting, I think it's great as a lawyer to have the opportunity often at short notice to go and visit very, very different. You realise how diverse East and Southern Africa actually is when you get to go to the different countries, such as going up to Ethiopia or going down to Malawi, that you feel like you know the continent, but then you actually realise you don't at all.
Right, yes, a huge continent with huge opportunities. Thank you so much, Laura. This is Nicolette Pomba-Van editor of ESI Africa, coming to you from the East African Power Convention in Nairobi. Thank you for listening.